Very common, very common. And I had this guy approach me recently, said, "Yeah, I feel blocked." I'm like, blocked. Okay. And I've had this a few times. People, they know there's something wrong, but they can't understand, they can't explain what the problem is. And I listen to them, I'm like, that doesn't sound so bad. So you feel blocked. And then I do a scan on them and I see this big centipede along their spinal column
Hmm.
system, which doesn't require any sense of incumbency whatsoever, no sense of
Hmm.
mutual obligation or responsibility. And you find that most in people from America, because that hyper individualism, they just ghost you, right? Rather than getting into any uncomfortable, awkward space where they might actually communicate something that might help you a lot, but they don't care, right?
Hello, all beautiful, courageous people around this magical, gorgeous planet. My name is Robert Canis, and this is another Beyond the Courage podcast. Beyond the Courage is about celebrating life, about celebrating our guests. Last week we had an amazing guest, Kim McCall from Australia, from Adelaide. And today we have another amazing guest, super excited, Julian Palmer, creator of world famous Changa, filmmaker, author, and an amazing persona. How you doing, Julian,
I'm
today?
doing really well. I'm in southern Turkey at the moment. There's a goat herder, sheep herder coming past, people cycling around, and it's generally pretty nice here in mid-October. It's good weather, and not too many people, which is nice.
Awesome. As we have spoke a little bit privately before this podcast, I gotta admit that when I was doing research about you, you are quite a persona. Like you had really amazing life. You introduced the Changa to the world, and you do a lot of beautiful things. This movie, Contemplation, is really superbly beautiful and interesting. Also, you have mentioned in your book, Articulations, that you wrote this book because people were asking you all over the same questions. And Beyond the Courage is about celebrating life. And today we would like to celebrate you. And I would like to ask you, how would you like to be celebrated? What would be the most proper
Well, I get a bit awkward about the idea of celebration. I'm due to turn 50 early next year, and I was thinking like, no, I'm gonna feel uncomfortable about being celebrated, so I might just, be somewhere where there can't be any celebration around me. But I'd prefer that people, not to get too cliched, but I do feel uncomfortable being celebrated. I think there's a certain level of egotism that can sort of become reinforced when people are celebrating you. Though it's nice to have people's respect and encouragement for sure. Yeah, I think that. Yeah, I prefer to create beautiful spaces and beautiful events and create a good environment rather than the focus just being on me. I find that a little bit awkward.
Yeah, that's understood. So maybe let's just celebrate life. Let's have fun. Enjoy this conversation. Uh, I got this question for you. Sometimes I work a little bit with AI, and we try to create really interesting, unique, progressing questions. If the ayahuasca and DMT were writing a letter to humanity, what would be its opening line? What humanity needs the most right now?
Well, it depends on which humanity you're talking about. As I think I have experience mostly with Western humanity, and Western
Mm,
humanity, I define as generally the white Europeans uh, living in who are from the area which used to be the Roman Empire, right? And have the default religion for many hundreds of years was Catholicism. And I think there's quite a lot of programming in that consciousness, and a lot of and I think in the last 100 years or so, quite a lot of brainwashing, a lot of propaganda, and I would say the first the first communication is that um, consciousness is real, and that your existence and life itself is far, far bigger than just this reality. This reality is just one of many, many, many realities. And this is your life. And we're not so much in a game, but a kind of a mutual co creation where how we live is how we can best live is not just by bouncing around, following the rules, doing what we're told, parroting what the news says, or just buying into all these talking points related to all the propaganda that's coming through the pipeline, through the media, through social media. But how can we step outside the cultural box and create the life that not just we want, but what humanity wants? And it's a little bit like similar to what JFK said, ask not what you can do for humanity. Um, ask what you can do for humanity,
mhm,
and how you can actually give. And our society's set up in such a way that it's not necessarily easy to give, to share, to create. Everything's quite stitched up. So you've got to create a way of life where you can share value and essentially change the rules of the game, because the game that we're told exists and how it works, it's all a it's all it's all propaganda, right? It's all the go to university, get a job. It's all that kind of stuff that the hippies back in the 60s went, look, this is all bullshit. Let's just drop out, right? But
yeah.
I think in our day and age, people are they're they're looking at this and they're not necessarily dropping out. They're thinking, how can I create a better world? How can I transform humanity? How can I listen deeply enough to myself and to the plants, to the animals, to nature, that I can really bring something of value to the table? And when you do, and the internet gives us this ability, anyone can, in our day and age, can create a viral meme. Anyone can create a little video or create a song or a piece of art that can reach a lot of people, and anyone can uh, communicate an idea that can change the world. So we've got a lot of power. We've got a lot of power, and I think the plants show us that, hey, you're not just boxed in programmable robots. You've got this godlike creative power, and you've got this amazing technology, and what you do and how you choose to live is up to you. And so that should fill us with optimism that we have a possibility before us that's very potent. And not to ramble on too much, but the world that I grew up, that I thought was possible, over the years, I've understood that there's so many more possibilities, and I've understood how to listen to life, to listen to the signals, to listen to people enough to know how to create change, how to create healing, how to enable my own healing, my own understanding, and that of others. So, yeah, I think what we're dealing with is this, if used appropriately, and we're not just using psychedelics to, cure PTSD or cure depression in this kind of medicalization mode. What we're dealing with in these compounds is a kind of a key that can unlock not the potential of the human brain, but of the organism itself. And in that understanding, when you understand how suboptimal our civilization is, and you understand, or you have a dreaming, what would an optimal civilization be like? How would people live? And what has this civilization gotten wrong? And when you start to go into your cognitive dissonance enough that you can begin to really change things and come more into alignment with a truer state of balance and health, where you actually get to reassess every assumption that you have about yourself and how you work, how your awareness works, how your consciousness works, what your potentials are, what your capacities are. And I think, these plants can show us what our potentials are, what our capacities are. And once we get that insight, then we can begin to cultivate these potentials.
It's a very beautiful put. Thank you. And how do you see the future of consciousness of humanity? We got those amazing tools. There's more and more people taking psychedelics right now. We have hyper communication like podcasts, many tools, many other tools to help us transcend our weaknesses, to work with the ego. What do you think? And then on the other side, we have technology. We got internet algorithms, AI.
Well, I
What
think
would
a
be
lot.
your vision? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I'm actually writing a book about this.
Can you
And
elaborate about this for us?
yes, yeah, I can elaborate a bit about it. But I think what we're seeing is quite quickly that AI and robots can very quickly do almost all the things that we do as
Mm-hmm.
human beings. And so actually, we've got to ask ourselves, uh, what is it that us human beings can do that's unique to us? And you got to ask, okay, I think a lot of people would not be able to say actually what is a value that human beings have, because essentially their vision of what a human being is, that human beings are basically these biological machines, and that there's often a very materialistic perspective in culture as to what a human being is. So I think a lot of people were like, wow, it's like that Ray Kurzweil perspective that human beings are redundant, and we're just going, the computers are going to take over, the AI is going to take over,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to upload our consciousness into AI, and the robots are somehow going to be our evolutionary successes. I'm smiling now because it's actually quite absurd if you have any understanding about human consciousness and human evolution, because human evolution must proceed from humans. Machines are not they don't possess the same kind of consciousness that we have. And I think our understanding of what a human biological machine is circa 2024 is very limited, actually. And I think when you take DMT and you take the ayahuasca, you begin to see and have an understanding of what this technology is and what it can do. Like I was talking about the human potential. And I remember the first time I took Syrian and DMT, I had this epiphany and I said, we are the technology. And
Hmm.
so I did have an understanding prior to that, but definitely I understand that we are technology and we have a purpose and a meaning and a function that within our suboptimal civilization we're not presently living. So we've got to ask ourselves, okay, we're living in a suboptimal civilization, not let's just give it to the robots and the AI and they can, you know, compute and hold all this information and, you know, essentially operate as machines, but in a way that operates better than what we do. But we've got to ask ourselves, what is our true functionality as human biological organisms? What is our meaning and function and purpose upon the earth? So these, you know, it comes back to these kind of, what is the meaning of life? You know, and that's actually not the right question. The right question is more like, what is the purpose of the biological human organism? What gives the biological humanism organism the most, what brings it into balance? What is its function? What is the most optimal way for the human being to live? And what does it do? And my understanding is that the mechanical view, or that we're just this meat or this flesh, is a very, very simple, primitive view of what human beings are. And from a kind of, let's call it like hyperdimensional view, that we actually are a meeting point of different frequencies of consciousness and awareness and, let's say, energy, you know, which of course is a very, again, it's a primitive term because we live in primitive times, right? We don't have a good linguistic terminology for um, the framework of the spiritual technology. Even the word spiritual is loaded and has all these connotations baked into it. But what I'm talking about when I talk about spiritual is stuff that is not matter, stuff that is not the meat space, and I think when we inquire and we look into ourselves, we'll find that there's most of our potential within the realm of what is not matter, whether that is, that's the metaphysical, that's the emotional, let's say, that's the intuitive, that's the psychic. And this is the deep mystery of human consciousness that very few in our world manage to apprehend or come to terms with, because it is so vast. You could call it the inner world, or the psyche, or the unconscious, or whatever it is. And I think, yeah, when you take psychedelics, obviously you start to begin to understand that world, and you have a little taste of, okay, well, how can I operate within this framework that is the metaphysical, that is consciousness? And I think this is where we begin to really grasp and apprehend the question, okay, what is the meaningful, most significant aspect about being human? And I think there's a lot of religious doctrine and I suppose spiritual, I wouldn't call it egotism, but there's a lot of ambition, let's call it, within the mystical traditions of religion that posit that the aim of life is somehow to reach this state where you're escaping this reality, where you're becoming enlightened and you somehow transcended this reality and you're liberated and all this kind of jazz. So it's quite orientated to this viewpoint of transcendence and in
Mhm.
some cases a kind of escape. And for me, that's not really how I see uh, the end game. The end game for humanity is more within the framework of a collective operational framework that is orientated towards the metaphysical, so that the and I think in our day and age we're very much atomized, separated, living highly individualized lives, whereas the majority of the time that the human species has been around and all our ancestors for millions and millions of years, going back to the ape men in Africa, they were all living in small bands of tribes, and that's the healthy way for human beings to live and learn and to understand each other. I think this um how we're living in this okay, if we were living in a system where nuclear families were actually 50% of them weren't getting divorced, okay, great. We can see that that might be okay, but we're living in this system where families are often not staying together. We're living in this broken system of increased alienation and people being increasingly separate from one another. So the future I see is within humanity, not the individual realizing their own consciousness or their own enlightenment or their own frequency, but people coming together and realizing the the truer group consciousness of humanity, whereby there is a mutual creativity and the creation of a vibrational sphere of relatedness and mutuality and um, a space in which there is given permission for the individual to grow and understand their own emotional, mental, psychic response. I think we have this idea that a friend is someone you can communicate your thoughts and feelings to, and these days, who's really doing that? Who's really actually communicating their thoughts and feelings anyway? I think we live in this place where people are very often not communicating their thoughts and feelings to anyone. And as I see it, people seem lucky if they've got one true friend in our society, because we live within. We've been molded by a very, let's call it, corrupted system whereby we are programmed to view each other as dispensable, disposable. Our consumerism posits we're kind of programmed to see each other as shiny packets, as consumer items, and we're not really engaged in the work of uh, any kind of tender carefulness and attentiveness that an understanding of mutual human unity and consciousness would innately require us to. We live within this system which doesn't require any sense of incumbency whatsoever, no sense of
Hmm.
mutual obligation or responsibility. And you find that most in people from America, because that hyper individualism, they just ghost you, right? Rather than getting into any uncomfortable, awkward space where they might actually communicate something that might help you a lot, but they don't care, right?
Hmm.
This is
Hmm.
the society we're living in, this very careless, unintimate, disassociated, psychotic, ghostly, haunted, crazy world. And, you know, that's what we should be waking up to. That's the hard reality of it, is waking up to that and then looking that in the eye and dealing with it somehow. We've all got to do that.
Yeah, uh, it will be very challenging to do not agree with you with all of what you said. Uh, you're laughing. Like we talked before the podcast, I love your energy when I was watching your interview, preparing to this to our conversation. You are having this amazing sense of humor. Do you recall any situation like when you go like really deep into some, let's say, some psychedelic or DMT experience, which was really funny or really entertaining?
Well, it's all, you know, one of my mentors in the late 90s said, life's a joke and we're the punchline.
Yeah.
So there's, and I think humor is paradox. Spirit communicates in paradox. So wherever there's humor, you know that there's that understanding of paradox. And, even though people can say, well, all this reality is an illusion, it doesn't exist, it does exist as well. And that's a paradox. It does have a great solidity to it. And yet it doesn't matter as well. It's all a
Hmm.
play. And so that's the real paradox of existence. And I think, yeah, of course, humor's the way that you're going to be able to really get through to people. I was in the airport the other day taking a flight on a budget airline, and they were saying, well, you've got to pay because you didn't check in prior. You've got to pay. It was like $100. But you can't pay it here. You've got to go 2 floors up to the airport office with all your bags and do that. So I went there, and I saw the lady there. I said, "You're just waiting here for me, aren't you?" She's right there. I said, because I was in a former Soviet Union country, and I was absolutely, she was just cracking up because I couldn't get angry about it. Like, I didn't have it in me to get angry about it because there was no point. But she was just like, "Stop, stop! This is too funny." And I was quite loud as well. And because my commentary about the absurdity of the situation, you could see the boss there getting really comfortable because I was nailing it too. Like, I was really on, and I was like, shit. It's like commenting on tyranny. It's like Solzhenitsyn. It's like, we know that they're lying. They know that they're lying. We know that they know that they're lying, and yet they still lie, right? In this situation, we know they're screwing us over. I know this. They know they're screwing us over. So, in this situation, I think, what is there to do but actually have a bit of fun with it? And I'm not always like that. Sometimes I can get upset as well, and I can get angry, and I don't have a problem with it. But I felt like in that situation, that was really fun. I made what I could have been very grumpy and upset about getting ripped off and this absurd situation with this airline. And I think I made that woman's day. She was. I don't remember making any sort of, someone behind the counter laughing as much. And I think it's all these cliches like laughter's the best medicine, right? Like it's a way that we can release tension and stress and that we can see the bullshit around us and process it and kind of let it go in a way. So, yeah, I think there's obviously so much bullshit around us. There's so many things that are completely absurd and ridiculous and yeah, it's so I don't understand these people who are like, I'm professional and listen to me, I'm very serious. you know, this kind, I don't trust those kind of people, and I don't think anyone should. So, for me, I'm about, and I think in Australia as well, there's a lot that can be said about Australian culture, but one of the better things about us is we don't take ourselves too seriously, and it is a negative trait as well because you start to any time that you think that you're serious or that you might be in any way getting somewhere or progressing in life, people are trying to cut you down, but often with humor too. So the idea is they're really trying to there's a kind of egalitarianism there, which might not always be entirely fair, but there is this kind of naturally self-deprecating humor within our culture, and so we that you won't find so much in Europe or North America, for example. So yeah, I think for me it's one of the significant ways that we can express our response to things. When I go into an ice bath, for example, and it gets really cold, I'm not crying, I'm laughing, right? If I
Mhm.
experience a lot of pain, I'm laughing. If I have strong realizations in myself, I'm laughing.
I love
So I think it's more socially acceptable than crying, isn't it?
that. Yeah, it is. When you mention airport, it popped up to my mind that you coined this term torping after the airport, right? And also there's
That's right.
torping
That's some
and
good research
soplar.
there.
Those are the sounds we can make to scare off some spirits or entities during psychedelics experiences or just regular life. And I tried it a couple of times ago, and the ironic thing is that after I've done it a couple of times, you mentioned in one of your interviews that you may provoke those entities, and they more of their friends came over and more powerful.
That's right.
And
It's a very
after
important.
yeah, and after those experience, after I've tried to practice those sounds, the next days were superbly challenging. Like
Mhm.
some powerful entities came, and my
Right.
life become very very challenging.
Yep.
And you mentioned that beautiful thing that instead of doing this, we can just show to those entities, to those spirits, to those energies, unconditional love. And
Hmm.
when I tried that, uh, things like smooth out. Can
Yeah.
you talk about it a little bit for our viewers and listeners, because
Hmm.
this is a very
Hmm.
fascinating subject.
Yeah. 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 So a lot of the times, I think some people have some serious issues related to entities and mental health. And in many respects, sometimes it might be, I'm saying might, capital M, it might be that the person has a kind of a placeholder issue, because if it wouldn't be that issue, it might well be another issue that might even be worse. Because it comes back to worldviews and how we view the world. And I think most people have been inoculated into a worldview which is really that puts them in a place where they don't perceive the threat, where don't really understand the threat and the danger. And from my perspective, the more that I look at human life, the more I see that there is to be afraid of, right? So this goes against, I suppose, a common wisdom, which is like, it's all good, don't be afraid, everything's okay. So I don't see things like that. I think that if you're going to look deeply into the metaphysics of attack and how these malevolent consciousnesses operate within us and through other people, you begin to see a lot of things that are quite disturbing and difficult and scary. So rather than curl up in a ball, we've all got to find a way to exist within this paradigm. And yeah, sure, some people do choose to curl up in a ball, and I think, you know, there's many things that I could talk about right now, but one of the things that I see is that we live in a paradigm where if you begin to spiritually awaken to a significant degree and become significantly free, then you can, to the, say, to the parasitic farmers, you look like a sheep that's trying to escape the pen. You look, that's how you look. And so that's going to cause them to want to reel you back in and bring you back into a much more constrained framework. And so, as I see it, a lot of the best and brightest people, you know, all of us have grown up as teenagers and seen our peers and how they deal with coming of age. And a lot of the brightest stars don't make it. They maybe are too bright, and they might be too confronting for the real powers that be, let's say. So yeah, I've come to this, I don't know, it is, I suppose it's, you know, the truth is the truth, and it's my interpretation of what I see around me and human beings. And yeah, I think it is it is it is quite scary. And I think a lot of people, what they will do is they will kind of cut a deal with a malevolent force, and they will have a kind of interaction that may not be helpful to them, but at least it stops any other intrusion. It might be, for example, this is, of course, my understanding. You might have cluster headache attacks, for example, every few months, which are very painful and bad. But on the other hand, you have that. You could have attacks that could leave you completely schizophrenic. You could be completely out of your mind. You could actually go completely crazy and be seriously ill. You know, I bet I was listening to a podcast of Marta made, and he's got a good podcast about Dostoevsky and Nietzsche, how their lives were quite similar. And both of them were living in consistent agony, consistent suffering,
Yep.
consistent physical illness. And I'm listening to this and I'm like, this is all entity attack. These guys were both moving way past the paradigm, and they were getting attacked really badly. And of course, Nietzsche got eventually went crazy, completely crazy, which for me is synonymous with absolute that's absorption by the malevolent forces completely taking over. And so yeah, some people might find it easier to have a minor situation in their life, and it might just be migraines, it might be a kind of anxiety or depression, or a kind of an inner wonkiness, or they might feel drained all the time, something like that. All this is very common, very common. And I had this guy approach me recently, said, yeah, I feel blocked. I'm like, blocked. Okay. And I've had this a few times. People, they know there's something wrong, but they can't understand, they can't explain what the problem is. And I listen to them, I'm like, that doesn't sound so bad. So you feel blocked. And then I do a scan on them and I see this big centipede along their spinal column.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, yeah, that's quite a block, right?
Yeah. I'm not sure that all of our viewers and listeners understand, those that because in Western world we call it like mental issues, right? We send this person to
mental health issues.
mental health. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is this is the thing. I mean, I had this professor of psychiatry tell me years ago, psychiatry's bullshit.
Yeah, it's also hard to do not agree with that.
No,
it's like old tools.
Yeah, they're not
archaic.
actually they don't know what these conditions are, and they're not curing them, and they don't have the tools to heal the people of these conditions. So they're kind of, for sure there's a place for antipsychotics and some of the medication, but it's just keeping people's symptoms under control. And they don't know what it really is. So, okay, if it's not just imbalance of the brain chemicals, maybe we should consider what people like me are saying it is. And I recently spoke to a psychiatrist who's quite high up in the former Soviet Union in psychiatry, and explained to him about torping in entities. He got it within 5 minutes. He was like, yep, that makes sense. Yep. His brain just went tick, 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 tick. Yeah, because he had some understanding of entities and this sort of consciousness. So he was like, yep, completely made sense to him. And so I think it's just ultimately, it's like the question in the beginning of your podcast. What are the psychedelics and DMT and ayahuasca telling us? Well, they're telling us that we're not just a meat body, that we're actually a body of consciousness, we're a body of energy. And this is nothing new. Societies such as China and Japan and India, they map the energy body, the meridians, the chakras. This is all something that's stuff that people have been observing and working with for hundreds of years. And then you have these like Western skeptics with the goal to say, nope, that doesn't exist because science, right? It's just the height. Yeah. These so-called rationalists are actually utterly illogical and irrational. And it's like, no, all traditional cultures, they're just hallucinating that because we're better than them, It's just blatant racism. And I think that there's, the human organism, again, we're not just the meat space. There are these layers of energy and consciousness and awareness. And we just need to have an awareness outside of the traps of the ego, the traps of the mind, of the intellect. And if we go outside of the mind, we find a way out of the prison, then we can understand awareness, we can understand consciousness, and there's people like Barbara Ann Brannon who has created these quite amazing maps of the human energy field, which are quite astounding maps. And I think one of the most significant things in her maps of the human energy field is the interactions between human energy fields. And if we're going to be talking about what is most significant in the human experience, everyone's going to say the same thing. It's the relationships we have with other humans, whether, they're going to use the big L word generally. But most people, when you talk about, okay, what's the most meaningful thing in human life, you're going to come back to the relationships with other humans. And I think, say, the maps of Barbara Ann Brannon give us an understanding that these relationships are actually metaphysically founded, that there is a metaphysical consciousness. So ultimately, we're due for a paradigm shift, and we have been for a long time. But we're living within a world of very dense people. And I remember what it was like to be one of them. I remember very slowly pulling myself out of this very heady, quite concrete, grey, black and white worldview that is ultimately the worldview that the powers that be want us to have. And they want, it's like the devil's greatest trick is pretending that he doesn't exist. It's not pretending. It's the devil's greatest trick is I can't remember the word, that he's tricked us into believing that he doesn't exist, right? And that's the other thing. When you become aware, we're living within not just one reality, but multiple realities, and we live in a non-local reality. So what is it? Put all the physical substance of the universe, it just fits into a little room of 2 foot by 6 foot or something like that. So we ultimately live in a non-local universe, and so we can access many different realities. Say when you take ayahuasca or you smoke Changa or whatever it is, you can begin to have experience of different realms of reality. And that's, for me, that's kind of normal. People come and tell me all their experiences on DMT or whatever. And for me, it's another day at the office. I'm like, yeah, I've heard that before. Or, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. It's, but like I was saying, the unenchanted reality, let's call it, the meat space reality, which is the prison reality. They right, don't really want us breaking out of the fleshy prison and understanding the multidimensionality of existence, and to go around and start seeing that and realizing that you might be drawing a bit of attention to yourself, because in a way we do live in quite a tyranny. We live in a kind of a North Korea. We all live in North Korea in a sense, but it's painted. So it's just, I often talk about the analogy of the movie They Live, which I'm not sure you've seen. It's I think John Carpenter directed it. And when he
I don't
puts on
think so.
these glasses, he can see reality and the programming, and he can see that aliens rule this reality, and that they can see him, that he's got these glasses when he puts them on. So when you do wake up, and you do see, I think it can be quite tricky. And often people will, one person starts waking up and it inspires other people, but often what can happen in a cult like situation can develop. And there's a reason why all these cults go the same way. It's because, okay, initially the person who's waking up, they do have some insight and awareness, and the 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 parasites, they want to sabotage that as much as possible. And so that's when they come in, and that's when the often the cult leader is kind of co-opted or captured, whatever you want to call it. So again, that's what I'm saying. Like, reality is a scary situation, and we're all in this North Korea. It's like, don't the the idea is, well, within society or religion, it's like, oh yeah, you too can become enlightened, or there's no limit to your potential. But there's one thing that I've been exploring and understanding recently is these people who get meditation induced injury, um,
Yeah, I heard
which
about
is,
it. One of your
yeah,
interviews.
which is, as I understand it, if you're a meditator and you start cracking the cosmic code, and you start going into these bliss states and these beautiful states of consciousness, you're going to attract unwarranted attention. And that's why the symptoms of this meditation induced injury is disassociation, anxiety, all these kind of mental health challenges that for me is synonymous with a kind of entity attack.
Uh, have you ever experienced being outside of time dimension?
No, I never have. I never have.
uh, what do you think we can do about those entities, those attacks? What's the purpose of it? Is it to make us stronger, to our spirits, our beings, our souls,
Well,
however we view it?
there's
And how
different.
we can how we can educate ourselves? Like, can we? Is it possible to create some kind of alternative educational system? Like we have podcasting, for example, or we can exchange information.
Yeah.
What you can do about it?
Well, it's difficult because it's all around us. And the
Hmm.
more, like I said, the more you wake up to it, and the more you see it around you, the more you see it influencing your relationships with others and influencing the reality around you, you start to realize that we're in a kind of a war. We're in a state of a war. We're in a kind of a spiritual war. So I think many people, and probably I was brought up to just kind of like stay, go so close to the ground that
Hmm.
you don't pose a threat, that no one sees you, that you kind of remain unscathed and no bits of shrapnel or bullets hit you. So I didn't choose that path. I chose to jump out of the trenches and get attacked, right? Get amongst it. But necessity is the mother of invention. So I kind of had to learn torping, which is the technique that I use for dealing with spiritual attack. And yeah, I think that we're living within a time where more and more people are taking psychedelics and the they're understanding these malevolent forces. I remember seeing Kalindi Iyi at a conference in at EGA. I would have been, almost 20 years ago now. This big black guy from Detroit and saying, "Oh, you people going on about love and light, you don't know nothing. Oh, you take 15 dry grams and you go into the other dimensions and all the beings, they are mean and they are nasty."
Mm.
And I was like, that wasn't part of. I had some experiences, but nothing. He probably had much more experience of those kind of realities than. Yeah, I think that uh, I think it's very difficult. I think it's very difficult. And I think we've all got to find what works for us in terms of spiritual protection and living in a way that we can actually navigate what's around us and navigating the challenges of not just ourselves and those around us and society at large as well. I mean, I look at what's happening in the Middle East and I'm like, that's not even humans doing that. Those humans they're not in control of their facilities.
Mhm.
They don't have a choice. They're being forced to do the things they're doing. So I think that gives us, rather than emitting hatred against our fellow human beings, we can begin to have some compassion and understanding. Like it's a little bit like Jesus, forgive them, Lord, for they know not what they do. And in many respects, I think with awareness, you understand that a lot of people don't actually know what they're doing, that they're kind of possessed, they're basically crazy. And, if you see what's going in the Middle East, it's not logical, it's not humane. It doesn't make any sense. It's symbolic of mental illness. It's basically, and I think a lot of people are having an awakening at the moment. They're like, none of this adds up. It doesn't, it's not any kind of, it doesn't, almost none of what's happening makes sense in any strategic or human or economic sense. The only people benefiting from this suffering and warfare are the entities. And so I think rather than hating anyone, we're just, you know, or even loving them is we're kind of giving them energy in a way. Um, Ultimately, I think we're best focused rather than on reactivity and all these kind of polarized talking points that just waste energy. Our time and effort and human resources is best involved not just in optimizing our own rig and our own mental health and our own safety, but also orientating ourselves in the world that we're actually creating a sense of equilibrium and awakening and balance and peace and all the good stuff, right? But there's a saying, it's actually a Jewish saying, which I heard it years ago and I didn't understand it. And it's no good deed goes unpunished. I was like,
Yeah, I know the saying.
okay, right. So who's doing the punishing here? Tell me.
Mhm. You mentioned about this person doing huge doses of mushrooms. I had an experience once when I took 23 grams because there was no more. And it put me to the dimension for the whole night. It put me like partially into sleep because it wasn't manageable being awake.
Yeah, I've
And
had
I
that
was
too.
I
I've
was
had that.
begging for I was begging for mercy for all night.
Mm.
I've seen like for the first time from oneness something is detaching. It was just this. Um, yeah, but it was very interesting experience. I mean, enormous amount of suffering.
It does fragment us, and even such things as advertising. And one of the things that it did was just remove all the subconscious impressions that I'd received in my lifetime from advertising. So it really does a good job of defragging the hard drive. And so all the different parts and aspects of consciousness can relay and communicate with each other more easily, so you can come into a greater sense of wholeness. And last time I did it a couple of years ago, I didn't, I think that most people don't take it. Traditionally, you might take it once, you know, and it's an initiation. Most people are not going to want to take it more than once, twice, three times in their life, even. So it is quite strong. So I think one of these doses, because it does go in the visionary part, it's like 6, 8, it's normally 8 to 12 hours of very quite direct visual, sensory, emotional re-engineering of the psyche. So yeah, you're getting a lot of feedback. Hopefully, you're getting a lot of advice, and it's doing surgery with you. It's doing deep surgery with you, and helping you come into a greater sense of wholeness, I'd say. Psychological, mental, emotional, otherwise. So it's working on a level that I don't think a human healer would find it very easy to do. You can have great healing with a human healer or human being, but the work that a Boga does is quite unique.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. You think it will become more accessible, more popular tool for humanity in the future? So maybe if we use more broadly tools like Iboga, we could cure at least partially our society, our culture.
No, I don't think our society is
No.
curable. I think it just needs to be
Okay.
put down. We need to put it to sleep. So
I love your
sorry.
sense of humor. Thank you for
Yeah.
that.
We need to euthanize our society. No, it's like, you know, like not that many people would be able to handle a full-on Iboga journey. They're just not able to. So in our society, very, very few people are going to be able to do that and gain the benefit from it and have the ability to listen and understand and integrate it. So no, I don't see psychedelics as being tools for healing our society. They can assist those people who have autonomous thoughts and uh, and those who can take responsibility for themselves and other people, but most people, I think, they're just not in a space where really Iboga's going to be able to do that much for. It's just a bit much for the kind of people that our society spits out, the consumer capitalist society spits out. They don't have the mental, emotional, um, uh, ethos. They don't have a psychological ethos. They don't have a life ethos. that is going to enable them to really deal with the ramifications of Iboga. And it's like, in a way, some people describe it as being in the presence of a very stern grandfather. I think some people are just so far off the mark in a sense that they're committed to materialism or a very simplistic, crude lifestyle that honestly, how do you even work with that? So I think for the most part, we've probably got to not give sacred plants to people who have no understanding whatsoever of the sacred, right? It's not necessarily a good combination.
Mhm. So yeah, that's a strong message, but thank you for that. Uh, I have watched one of your interviews with this podcaster in Australia, Psychonauta Adapticus, I think, and he asked you when you were when you were making the contemplations about the really interesting interview, and you mentioned about the guy who had some really huge doses of Amanita muscaria,
Mhm.
and he had like felt really what it means to be a god. Would
Yes,
you
or to be God, right?
and to be god? And then you mentioned that you are going to use this Unreal Engine for animation.
Mhm.
Uh, would you be so kind and tell us a little bit more, because that was fascinating for me. I had experiences, huge doses with Amanita muscaria.
Mhm.
I can share later on if there will be time for that. That was a superbly challenging experience.
Mm, mm, mm.
How can you tell us about this story? This how it came out with those animations?
Yes, well, I know James who tells the story, and I knew him before he had that experience, and he was getting into Amanita quite seriously at that time, and he even make it into an oil and rub it on his face,
Oh wow!
and he had a strong connection with it. And I only worked with it once, and I haven't feel called to. I actually bought some recently in Kiev in Ukraine for
Mhm.
microdosing,
Yeah,
and
it's
I
very
did.
popular over there.
Yeah, I haven't taken it
Yeah.
yet, but I think yeah, I hear it's good. A lot of people using it for microdosing now, which sounds really cool. But the higher doses is not that common that people explore that. But he actually wrote that experience out in text and would share it with people. And like I was saying before, I think that James was attracted to having that experience because, like, one of the visions he has is, apples falling on the ground and, growing. Um, I think that he was kind of fertile ground and he was receptive to having that kind of experience. He asked for it. He asked the question, "What's it like to be God?" And the guide said, "All right, we'll give you we'll give you direct understanding of what that's like." And so he went through what that is like, being the universal consciousness that experience somehow all human beings consciousness at the same time, right?
Yeah.
And that's quite a download, I think. And we have people in our day and age might have an understanding of Advaita Vedanta and perspectives of non-duality and the universe, the singular nature of consciousness, unity of consciousness, all these ideas. But the download that he has there is quite a perspective of really communicating that, well, that there is an oversoul that's experiencing all of our consciousness somehow at the same time. And I think that's quite a mind-blowing concept as well. And at the end of it, the guide says, Well, now you know what it's like to be that consciousness, and that's why you should do everything in your power to reduce the suffering in the world. And that's been the download that I got to, I think. And I've spoken to many people who've really pushed the boundaries and the barriers. And there's a certain initiation stage you get to, I think, where you experience a space of collective suffering. And all the people I've spoken to, and it's not, it's not more than, 10 people who I've spoken to about this, but they all say the same thing, is like, from that point on, you do everything you can to reduce the suffering of humanity, because nothing means more than to do that, because you understand this pain is, you can never get away from it. Once you experience it, you know it's always there, and that it is being experienced, and it's overwhelming. And so it makes sense from that point on to do everything you can to reduce the suffering in humanity. Rather than, for example, just do everything you can so your own brain will light up, which is actually not a very good way to live. This kind of selfish hedonism, it's not actually a good way to live. But actually, if you are doing everything you can or within your power to reduce the suffering of humanity, which ultimately means to commit yourself to healing the unified planetary human body, right? That's going to bring you great fulfillment, satisfaction, pleasure. That's really going to light up your brain, and the power that is behind you is God, right? Because that's what God wants. And that is, if you are orientated in that way, then you're aligning with this power behind all appearances that's much greater than the secondary satanic power. People in this day and age can be deceived, and they come across some demons and they're like, oh, they're the ones that got the power and they're pulling on the levers. No, it's very stupid, very, very dumb.
Yeah.
Haven't really thought that one through.
But thank you so much for those profound words. I took once 17 grams of Amanita muscaria, and my mind started working like superbly effective, like in this movie Lucy. And so I decided to take more, and I took more. And first it closed me in the loop when there was a happening, like 5 seconds, same thing all over. I think it's Mobius loop. And it was speeding up. It crossed the speed of thought. It crossed the speed of light. It crossed the speed of madness. And then it put me to the hyperspace. And I was experiencing everything and everyone at once. Like you have the Big Bang and the whole history of the universe. It was maybe a span of 5-6 seconds. And I got a message: because of your life, like you lived before, you'll be experiencing this forever and ever, infinitely.
Yeah.
And then when the Amanita metabolized in my body, I was able to, like, I was reborn. I died. I was reborn, and surprisingly, I was a human again on planet Earth, and I was so shocked by that after being a god, like feeling like a god, I'm still a human. It was very awkward to be a human, after that experience.
Yeah.
And I have to learn everything from the scratch, like how to move my hand, how to start walking. And I was very mad at the Manita, but then understanding came, like full understanding of it. Changed my life, like really profoundly. But it is a very challenging mushroom to work with.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't been necessarily feeling that, yeah, I need that right now in my life, you know. I'm
Mhm.
kind of maybe someday I'll be like, yeah, I got to do 25 grams of amanita, but at the moment, no.
Mm.
Kind of after you kind of light the candles at both ends for a very long time, you get a lot of realizations and understandings and some, I think a lot of people, in our day and age, you don't need to have all these like earth-shattering experiences all the time. I've been finding recently the most value in low dose mushrooms and breath work, for example. And
Mhm.
that's when I'm really able to go deep into my own somatic experience, into the deep listening of my own body. And that's where I'm having the most breakthroughs as well, that are mysterious and engaging within the framework of my own energy body and my own humanity, rather than this, earth shattering, always trying to break through in the transcendental realm. So obviously there's a time and a place where that can be great and fantastic and worthwhile and useful. But I think a lot of people might forget, yeah, this kind of like low dose mushrooms in the float tank space, that can be when you're really coming back into your body and your humanity the most. And as you know, if you're a psychonaut, if you want to eventually take the journey back into your body at some point, or the hero's journey, you arrive back into yourself, into your humanity. um and that's not to It's like that movie Altered States, which is who was the director? It's kind of a bodgy film, and because the 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 in the movie it's almost like the protagonist, he goes too far and he goes too crazy and he becomes this monster, and it's like it's almost like saying, don't do it, stay human. But it's like, okay, there's you can do both. You can go far out, but you can also go far in too. And as human beings, yeah, like that movie was based upon John C. Lilly, who invented the float tank as well. So yeah, I find that space of stillness, listening, lower doses in the float tank is when, hey, you can really come into that deep that deep listening in the body. And they're some of the deepest bliss states that I've been in my life, when I do these like 4 or 5 hour float tank sessions, when I
Wow,
get into these
four or
states
five
of consciousness.
hours?
Yeah. And that's why
Wow.
I'm getting to states of consciousness where my body, my mind, and my psyche is like just a firing reward system after reward system of like, buddy, whatever you're doing here, keep doing that. And then you're just you just keep having these little breakthroughs in yourself, where you're engaging so deeply within yourself and connecting so deeply within yourself. That's going to result in these deep reward states that comes in that you experience as a kind of a bliss that transcends any drug experience.
Thank you for a nice tip. I never stay in the floating tank for longer than an hour.
Yeah, ideally you need to make friends with the owner. It's not always easy to do. See if you can get a good deal, because it can certainly be expensive, and maybe outside of hours, and you can do that. Because if you're gonna take, say, I think mushrooms are good, like 2 grams, not 3 grams of mushrooms is pretty good, and then you can really focus on that process of stillness and going deeply within the self undistracted. So yeah, I found
Mhm.
great value. I've got an article on my website about taking low doses of mushrooms in the float tank. I tried other substances like LSD. No, it didn't work. I've tried other things, but mushroom seems to be the one that works best. And I don't recommend ketamine or anything like that. That's ketamine is a
Yeah.
you do go in it float. That is a float tank. You don't need you're gonna forget where you are if you do it properly, right?
Being in a K-hole in the float tank is not a good idea, right?
No, you could, yeah, start thinking you're an amphibious creature and start to breathe underwater, which is not good.
Uh, Julian, I'd like to also ask you. There's a lot of people right now out there who are thinking about getting into this psychedelic, energetic world. What would you tell, like, average person who is thinking about getting into those dimensions, but it's like at some point afraid or skeptic? Because you are superbly experienced in these areas. You got years or even decades of dancing with those
Yeah,
plants and
I think,
molecules.
yeah, I think, look, in an ideal world, you'd come to a sort of center and there'd be other people there to support you, and we could go, okay, so you want to investigate this world and you want to begin to understand what it's like to have this kind of awareness. And I would say, look, you don't need to jump right in the deep end right away. And I wouldn't recommend people just start their journey with DMT or ayahuasca. I mean, you could do it, and some people do. I'd personally recommend cactus, for example, taking maybe 20, 30 grams of dried cactus powder. It's very gentle, and first timers will be like, well, I was expecting all this stuff to happen, and actually, this is just really nice. And it's enhancing, and your thoughts are enhanced. But it is definitely psychedelic. So it's very easy for a beginner to manage. And then I'd say, okay, well, then try a gram of psilocybin mushrooms, and put aside time to do it. Maybe you do it with a friend. You could do it by yourself. It's not that challenging to do. And then I always say to people, look, go out in nature, get an Airbnb, the neighbor's like a few hundred meters away, make a special occasion of it, and take it seriously, right? Give yourself time and space to go into it. It's not, you know, don't take it and watch TV or your video game or whatever, right? Obviously. So, I have heard of people who do that. So that's obviously not the right way to do it. You're just giving space to it. Just put on music and experience it. And then, okay, 1 gram was okay. Try 2 grams. And, you know, see how you go. And then maybe you want to try 3 grams next time. And then, okay, well, that might be more challenging. And then at that point, you might be able to like, well, okay, I got a little, I want to go deeper. Then you might want to smoke Changa or DMT. You might want to go, hey, look, I want to really go jump right in and see what's there. And some people might want to do that. Some people might want to, at that point, take ayahuasca, for example, and jump right in. I don't really recommend LSD to people, because I just think it's too unpredictable. But I think black market LSD quality often has a lot to be desired. And I think it's easy to run into trouble with it too. And I think this is the other thing. Like I said, I've been doing low dose mushrooms with the breath work. Hey, that's your supercharger. If you want to amplify your mushrooms 2 grams, try doing some breath work. Within 10, 20 minutes, like some stuff is going to come right up. You're going to hit you're going to hit some material to work with there.
What kind of
So,
breath work do you recommend?
I think, like any, it's a human mind has all this idea about breathing
Hmm.
and breath work. It's like you just need to do it in a way whereby you are bringing in a lot of air into your lungs quite rapidly. However
Hmm.
that works for you, I don't worry about technique. I just let my body do it, and not. It's. I think, yeah, all these ideas about techniques. I think, and breath holds and all this. I don't think you need to do that. So that's not something that I recommend people get obsessed with. It's just something that you need to do and figure out what works for you. Um, so yeah, and also ultimately that that for me, when I got into psychedelics, I was already when I seriously got into psychedelics, was already 6 years into a deep inquiry into the religious mystical traditions and all the philosophies of the world, and I read 10 books a week on all this sort of stuff. So I think ultimately it's good to have some kind of mental ontological footing into what you're going into. You're not just taking psychedelics, and so you have an understanding of mystical states and what other people have experienced, and you have an understanding of all of the humanity's understanding of itself, and the maps of the terrain that humanity has traditionally made. And you might not necessarily agree with it, but at least I mean, I don't necessarily agree or I don't necessarily have had experiences where I can go, that's a bardo. But at least I know that people, human beings, have an understanding of what that is, that they have talked about and explained and put that in their map. So you might not experience a bardo, but at least you know what people have talked about that they say is there, or their interpretation of it. So also I think, rather than just, I think it's important to have an appreciation that oftentimes we're going into dialogues with these agents, which are often plants or fungi, and they are agents of consciousness. They have their own voice, and these these agents, they can tell us things, they can teach us things. So I think it's important to have this awareness of nature, whereby nature is sentient, nature is alive. And of course, yeah, you get thrown out of the academy, out of university, if you even entertain such an idea. It's just the biggest kind of woo, right? So
Hmm.
yeah, unfortunately, our whole academia, intellectual life is all stitched up in within these prejudices and anti-science, anti-truth ideologies, that none of that can be real just because we say so, just because, there's no possibility of that because we can't measure it, right? So yeah, I think there's so much these days. We have access to so much information, so much insight. Of course, there are false teachers, there's false philosophies, there's all kinds of data coming down the pipe. And I think ultimately, yes, it's very useful to get your own data, but then again, it's useful to contextualize your data and understand where it connects to culture, where it connects to what other people have created, and the cultural reality that you find yourself in too.
Yeah. Thank you for this message. Very deep. At the end, I would like to ask you, Julian, what is your view on death? Is it a process or?
Well, my dad's dying at the moment. He's
Hmm.
dying of brain cancer. And I was really surprised when I told my friends. Their reaction was almost quite cliched, like, oh, that's horrible and terrible. And I'm like, why? I didn't say that. I didn't say, well, it's often these are in messages or texts or whatever. And I don't say why, because I think people are trying to console you about that. But I was actually a bit surprised by people's response because, yeah, I definitely see death as a transition, and I definitely don't see it as the end
Hmm.
result. I think we need to respect that there's some sort of transfer of energy. Um, I think these books are quite interesting, whereby people they get hypnotized and they explain what it's like in between lifetimes. And I think I think these are very interesting. But who can know for sure, right? I think Robert A. Munro was very influential to me when I was much younger. I think his books like Far Journeys are very interesting, but
Yeah.
I don't consider it like gospel truth. Seems to me that religion, all these books about hypnosis, Robert A. Munro, everyone agrees that there's a there's a um, there's a progression, there's an evolution, there's momentum of human energy as it dies. It's just a death of the physical form, that there is a soul, let's say, that moves on. And then I talked to one friend who's done this hypnosis himself, and he experienced other lifetimes on other planets. But he said, no, that
Wow.
was all completely normal. It wasn't alien. It was just normal. It was just how it is.
Wow.
And so I think, yeah, and other friends of mine have talked about having an understanding of their interdimensional self as well, that they've lived in other energy forms, that they haven't just lived as humanoid creatures on this planet or other planets as well. So I don't know how it works. I don't think
Yeah.
anyone does. I think Robert A. Munro's book Ultimate Journey, I think, is very interesting because it talks about the multiplicity of personalities and psyche and psychology. I tend to think that each of us is a kind of a one-off project, like a work of art, and we're put together, and there's different facets of consciousness. But when we die, that consciousness goes back to where it's come from, and then decides to continue its project of evolution, growth, aliveness, whatever you want to call it, in some other form. So that's what seems to be happening to me. That's what I'd say. But I don't really know. I don't have that much first-hand data on this. But also my mother, when people would die, she would talk to dead people. She would talk to their spirit, their soul,
Mhm.
and I've done that too. So yeah, for me, there's a definite continuance, and it's nothing. I don't have any fear of death, and I think that if you do, I know that some people have smoked DMT and overcome their fear of death, and I think many people are scared of death. But even if it was some sort of final end, nothingness, I don't think we should be scared of that either. But definitely there's a time and a place for death. I'm not one of these people who thinks we should be living for a few thousand years. I don't think that's a great idea.
Would you just have said it's really very resonating with my heart. So Julian, just tell us where we can find you, like where our viewers and listeners can find you, and what are your plans for next couple weeks, months, years? What are your boldest dreams?
Yes, well, I always have all kinds of things on the cook. I'm spinning a lots of different plates. You can find my website, Julian Palmerism. That's got a link to my podcast and my movie, Contemplations, and my book, and some articles that I've written there. Yeah, I got some filmmaking projects that I'm working on, and I've got a book that I want to release by the end of the year, and I've got some sacred medicine projects as well that I'm plotting. So yeah, I'm also working with people, doing stuff like talking sessions with people, so helping people with issues that they have. So yeah, it's life is it's pretty interesting sometimes.
We will place all the links in the description, and yeah, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. We haven't talked about Changa, which I'm very happy about because mostly
Yeah,
we
that's
talk with
good. Yeah,
people.
go ahead and talk about that. Yeah, guys, a Changa, just put it in a bong, get a lighter, so light it up. Hold it in about a minute. Breathe out. That's all you need to know.
Thank you for this hands-on experience. Usually we ask our guests about hands-on experience, so here we go. And you can live alternate life during 10 minutes, right? You can live
Oh,
through
you
the...
could. I never have, but I heard of people who have. Yeah,
Mhm.
sure.
All right. Thank you so much, Julian. Thank you. We encourage our viewers and listeners to put comments and let us know who would you love to see as our next guest. Thank you, Julian, so much. It was a pleasure and fun talking to you. Julian Palmer was our guest today on Beyond the Courage podcast.
Thanks, Robert.
Have a beautiful, magical life, Julian. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Maybe I'll see you somewhere in real life in this life.
Thank you.